Now we have the bigger picture of war and technology with General Andrzejczak from OTB Ventures, Patrick Schneider-Sikorsky, NATO Innovation Fund, Jacek Siewiera, Baltic Center for Strategic Analysis, and Piotr Wojka, Eastern Flank Institute, who's going to be moderating. All right, I think we're all getting mic'd up. All right, welcome.
Tam dzień dobry. Gdzie tam siadamy obojętnie? No to wszystko jest. Okay.
Hello everyone. After the lunch, I hope that we won't make you more sleepy. My name is Piotr Wojka. I'm the director of Eastern Flank Institute. It's the think tank based in Poland, trying to translate lessons learned from Ukraine to defense policies in the Eastern Flank countries. And it's my pleasure to host a panel today with really well-esteemed guests like General Rajmund Andrzejczak, former Polish Chief of Defense, now in OTB Ventures, Mr. Patrick Schneider-Sikorsky from NATO Innovation Fund, as well as Jacek Siewiera, former head of National Security Bureau, the main advisor of President of Poland, now in Baltic Center for Strategic Analysis, but also in many other institutions like Atlantic Council, for example. What will be our panel about? Then we have this duty to talk with entrepreneurs and engineers like the most of you about some bigger picture, right? So the geopolitical conditions for the further growth of defense sector. And I just want to underline that we should always remember that current period of growth in this sector, it's somehow obviously driven by the war. And I'm not saying this only to pay my respect for the fallen heroes in Ukraine, for example, but also to underline that at some point probably we'll have this period of time where the conflicts will be freezed down or the crisis will be less salient. And then I want to ask these three marvelous speakers here for their perspectives based on their experience, how we can preserve the further growth of this sector. And first I would like to ask General Andrzejczak from his military perspective. How do you think, General, is it feasible to preserve the further growth of defense budgets, right, for some further situational awareness of military officers, especially in NATO countries, even after the war will stop, even if we will have some peaceful solution?
Well, if there's need, we should. It's easy answer. But you asked me for a bigger picture, so before we go to details and the budgeting and also technology, we should describe the big picture, which consists of two things. Technology without a strategy is just only cost, nothing. With uncertain, there's any returns. You're just spending money. You don't know for what. If there is strategy without technology, it's illusion, because you have no instruments. So the 50% of discussion should be focused on technology, the areas you're asking me for. But the second thing about the strategy. And the question is, how we gonna really fight with Russia and how we gonna win with them? If you have answer, then I will answer you the question about how should we spend the money. Easy.
Okay, then. If I just may ask you more precisely, right? Because the problem, I believe, today is not only Russia. We observe some other crises, mainly in Middle East these days, probably the rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific that may also have effects in some actual, I don't want to say actual conflicts or hybrid conflicts, right? But then there is a room for maneuver for today's startups, small and medium enterprises, to offer something more, right? More globally.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really big picture. So you have I call it, using the Clausewitzian theory, take three centers of gravity. First one, from Polish perspective, of course, is Russia, and the center of gravity is Poland and Ukraine. Then we go to Middle East, which is, the headlines every day. You have Iran and Israel as the center of gravity. And then you go to Pacific, which is the last one from Polish perspective, but the first one for US, the biggest security delivered in any way. And the question is, it will be interesting also from a NATO perspective, because if anything happened in Taiwan today, no single NATO plan will be activated. You know it. There will be some kind of, coalition of will, maybe some suggestions, polite or not, depending what the mood of President Trump. But this is not NATO, and this is the biggest potential conflict by scale. Then you go to Middle East, which is hot, and we have no plans in NATO to go to fight with Iran. No regional plans will be activated. And anyway, it is still global security. And then we go to the first from Polish perspective, which is Russia. We do so. We have plans. But in this center of gravity, 50% of it is Poland, which is in NATO, and 50% is Ukraine, which is not NATO yet. So the question is, you're asking about a Polish perspective, NATO perspective, Eastern flank perspective, or Western civilization perspective? This is a good question. So we have 3 centers of gravity, 3 hotspots. Probably each of them is a kind of inspirational lessons learned for us, or should be. But we're sitting in Warsaw here, so let's expect some Polish, optics and the perspective.
Right. So can I just jump in there on one point? You're correct in say when you say that obviously NATO has doctrine and has plans in certain scenarios and not in others, but in the sort of private defense tech sector, a lot of the companies that we work with don't have those same constraints, because there are export controls and so on, but they are private companies that can actually make their own decisions, and a lot of them are motivated by, well, primarily by defending Europe, but there's a more global security mission as well. So we had one of our portfolio companies speaking to a sovereign in the Middle East, and someone said, "Oh well, why are they doing that? That's not NATO." But I mean, it's their response was, "Well, this impacts our energy prices, this impacts our security as well, and therefore, thank you, thanks." And therefore, we can't just think narrowly in terms of
absolutely. But who is the decision maker? Who is
the
decision maker to decide what kind of technology to certain solving the problems? That's the strategic question mark.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that especially in the long term. So NIF was the NATO Innovation Fund was set up to both look at kind of long-term capability needs and effectively plan very far ahead into the future about which types of technologies could make us more resilient and more better defended. But also, then when you have a pressing need like what's going on in Ukraine, like what's happening now in the Middle East, it's pretty obvious that you need to, for example, shoot down Shahids, and that just becomes a capability requirement. I don't think anyone would dispute that, and you don't need. And so I think that then it becomes probably more of a procurement issue than a planning issue. So. But yeah, I think you were asking as well whether what happens to the market when if there's if some of these conflicts die down, which obviously we hope that they do. But if you look at how badly prepared how badly prepared everyone was for the current situations, the current conflicts that we find ourselves in, we can't allow that to happen again. And so it's not it's much better to be. It's much better to be building companies and actually building resilience and building our industrial base based on something that may or may not happen than kind of knee-jerk, frantically responding to something that has happened that caught us by surprise. So I don't think that, obviously, we're mostly in the private sector. We have our links to NATO, but we're not defense planners. We're not ministers, so we can't influence the way that national budgets are going. But if you look at all the money going into defense tech companies from the private sector, I think you can deduce that VCs are betting on the fact that we will we will need these capabilities. We will need more, better autonomy, better defense supply chain, better ISR capabilities to fill a lot of the gaps that we have now and will have in the future. And they're betting on the fact that government spending is going to increase and is going to be allocated to a lot of these capabilities. So, but it's hard to predict.
Right. There is also one additional question, if I may, Patrick, because when we see today's growth in the defense sector, especially when it comes to startups, it's rather focused on the systems or products, solutions with, I would say, short-term loop of prototyping and also effects. But at the same time, we still need some bigger systems, right? Long-range weapons, for example, or some large command systems, probably supported by AI and so on. And here we have longer perspective of investment. Do you believe that in longer term you will be more eager as VC community, I would say, to support this type of companies and solutions? Because it gives you a longer perspective, but it's also much more risky, right?
Yeah, I mean there are obviously longer term technologies that we look at and that we know that we back, but I think also what you're describing sounds more like the types of platforms being built by primes and so on, and those are not always VC backable. They're quite incredibly capital intensive, and yeah, the sort of economics are not that great. But in terms of other longer term technologies that we look at, it's more on the kind of defense supply chain side of things. So maybe some of the technologies that would go into some of these larger exquisite platforms developed by primes. So in terms of sensors and new materials, and even kind of going even deeper than that. We haven't made an investment in space, but we look at a lot of companies trying to find technological solutions to the lack of rare earths and the lack of ability to process them, and which are a huge part of our defense supply chain, and make us more vulnerable. So that's kind of how we're thinking about the long-term investments and long-term technologies, as opposed to we're never going to be investing in like an F-35, if that's what you mean. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. Then I would like to jump to Jacek Siewiera, because due to your, really the different career achievements, because Jacek here, he's also a well-acclaimed medical doctor, as well as former military and also advisor to government. Then I would like to ask for your perspective, because I know that you're especially sensitive when it comes not only to hard defense, I would say, but also, I would say, resilience of societies, right, and the civilian sector. I would like to ask, do you see also a chance that some of the defense companies that may use their technologies, as I would say, dual use, to make some really serious growth in the future? Because as we see all of the mentioned conflicts in Russia, in Ukraine, in the Middle East, as well as some potential conflicts in the Indo-Pacific, I believe that the societies will become more and more vulnerable to some, some offensive measures by some really evil guys. So, how do you think? In which sectors of the resilience business, I would say, where do you see the best perspectives for growth?
So, your diagnosis is absolutely right. The societies and the communities will play a crucial role. Also because of the role of the artificial intelligence, the way how it catalyzes the battlefield, but also our daily operations. We have to protect this critical asset, which is not, at the end of the day, a fuel, gold, money, currency, energy, which is human. This will be the value which cannot be replaced. And by having said that, I think that it's also extremely important to take a look from the perspective of the experiences from the battlefield in the theater, in Ukrainian theater, but also in the Middle East recently. For the centuries, wars were related to the front line. Casualties, military effort, strategical thinking, these were the aspects related with the front line, with all the consequences of it. Ukraine was the first phenomenon in which, maybe with some exemptions from the Second World War, majority of the losses and strategical impacts were made deep behind the front line with the use of cheap technology. It exposed the agglomerations, the cities, the communities, and civilian infrastructure in the way in which it was never seen before in the history. And there were some thoughts. 2 days ago, I spoke with a colleague of mine in Atlantic Council, General Cavoli, with whom we worked with General Andrzejczak for a long time during the war. And there were a lot of thoughts expressed that NATO war will be something different, extremely different from what we see in Ukraine. During the entire 4-year period, I heard a lot of experts saying, oh, NATO war will be totally different thing. At the end of the day, the judgment hammer was the Middle East operation, in which, once again, it's not the front line which the biggest losses and the outcome is determined. These are the cities and the security of the infrastructure deep in the tissue of our societies. So with what may be beneficial for you, I see here a lot of friends from many different sectors, and what you can get out of this panel is that there is an important opportunity which is maybe less sexy than becoming a super neo-prime who will manufacture drones in the scale of Stark Industries from the Marvel movies. This is the unsexy but inevitable security of the agglomerations and the infrastructure. I see Orazio here. I see friends from Orca, companies who are aware of the fact that you have to take advantage in this layer, which is maybe less spectacular of becoming a superhero of the defense industry or the CEO of New Rheinmetall, but will make a huge impact in upcoming time by protecting the critical asset which Western civilization has, which is the human factor.
Thank you very much. We still have something around 7 minutes, so I will have just one short question for every one of you. If you see these distinctions still between operations of military and operations of civilian sector, and obviously, for example, armed forces, they have much bigger budgets than, for example, police forces or border guards, do you see, and I would like to ask you for one specific type of technology, if you can indicate it. Do you see any kind of real dual-use technology that should be developed jointly by the armed forces and these other type of, I would say, civilian uniformed services? It's important from my perspective because when we see these conflicts, obviously in Ukraine, where the energy plants are, for example, they are targets for Russian massive air attacks. And at the same time, we see war with Iran, where for example, desalination plants, they are also the target. Who should protect them? And I believe that from the military perspective, it would be hard to add another layer of defense, right, to your systems.
Because war is a political issue. War is not for army only, is it? So if you're asking me, I spent 36 years in the army, mostly in the combat units. I am armor officer, so I cannot imagine dual-use M1A2 tank, or so this is still my challenge. So I have to shift a little bit to different technologies. Two things are important when I see Ukraine and in Iran. Both of them are wars of energy. From the very beginning, Russia tries to kill the Ukrainian energy for many reasons. To kill, to disrupt, to delay, discommunicate from an industry. So definitely the energy is number one. From Ukrainian perspective, look what they're doing. Deep strikes, they're killing not specific military targets. They're not hitting statue of Peter the Great in St. Petersburg. They're killing or trying to kill the Russians' energy. Also to achieve the strategical objective. We're looking in the Middle East, in Iran, it's exactly the same. It's still concerned. 1,000 targets a day, it's the targeting of US Air Force. Can you imagine? Never happened in history. They're killing, of course, the military targets, but still considering killing Iranian energy infrastructure just to change the game. And what Iran is doing, again, they trying to threaten Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, everybody in the region, that they're going to kill their energy. So this is the short term. I don't like the short term issues because we're solving problem of a day, but not solving problem of a year. In the long term, from Poland, the main engine for our prosperity is artificial intelligence. Full stop. If someone doesn't understand, it probably has no TV set at home or connection to internet. Artificial intelligence is a multiplication of every single sensor or effector. But to make it much more efficient, you need cheap and accessible energy. So my answer to your question will be anything we do in the civilian sector or military one, which is pretty foggy, is overlapping. It's not like I can say, well, look Iran hit the AWS, Amazon Web Services servers, and I think it was in Bahrain. Why they killing, servers? Because they know it very well. The Israeli Air Force, they're using backups for data, for the applications, and so that's my answer: energy and artificial intelligence.
Thank you. And the same question from the business perspective, and also next to Jacek from the perspective of, I would say, civilian resilience. We have just below 2 minutes for answers, so guys, please be concise.
I'll try to be quick. Yeah, so I think I agree with the general that and obviously these things like energy resilience and our supply chains and our food, our water, all these things are become military targets or targets of hybrid warfare, and need to be protected and enhanced. But on a more tactical level, I think you can see examples of counter UAS companies working with authorities to protect critical infrastructure, not just military targets. So in Germany, you have the police working with the military to protect some of these or at least that's the plan, to protect some of these non-military targets, because they've become legitimate targets for our adversaries. So I'd say that's a technology that you might have slightly different modifications for a civilian use case versus a military use case, but effectively it's the same capability. Then on one more, I would say, is probably cyber as well, where we've seen countless cyber attacks on major corporations, and also those delivering critical infrastructure in Europe. And again, it's one of those things. Is it a civilian? Is it a civilian technology? Is it a military? I don't think it really matters anymore, because almost everything is hybrid these days. So.
Okay, thank you. And then Jacek, from the civilian perspective, what do you need from military? What should be developed both by militaries and, for example, border guards?
I think that this synergy is already taking place. Okay. So I will not compete with industry leaders or business leaders to explain where the value is. I think that they will see it in the market when demand is. The question is, if you listen to the market, where demand is. Because this is deeply rooted in the doctrinal changes which take place. From the civil protection, from resilience perspective, now we have this great talk about NATO. Once again, these turbulences, once again, these talks. When recently you have seen the Atlantic Council guy praising the European French companies. When you have seen the conferences organized by, like, resilience media, new companies, 4 new companies, gathering more people especially in London last year, than the conferences organized by the Rheinmetall or MBDA. These are the changes which are taking place within the discussion of the broader perspective of what is the identity of the European Union and how the European security should be framed. I think that from the times when security was related with the frontline, it's good for technology that right now hybrid threat shapes that. Because as long as the costs in the Western Europe will be higher than the costs at the indirect backyard of the front line, the potential for Euro-Atlantic cooperation will be much higher with the accent on European identity.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. These were the words of wisdom. Let's give them ovation. Thank you very much for this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.